It all began one fateful day when a missing persons report sent shockwaves through the community. What started as a simple search for a woman quickly unraveled into a chilling tale of deceit and murder. The case of Samuel Brammer and Elene Gowan started as a missing persons report, but it quickly turned into something much darker. What seemed like a tragic disappearance soon uncovered a web of lies, strange behavior, and a brutal crime. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered shocking evidence that pointed straight to Sam. The discovery of Elene's body and the clues that followed led to a tense trial where the truth about her death was finally revealed. This is the story of how one man's attempts to cover up his crime led to his eventual arrest and the search for justice for Elene. Samuel Brammer and Elene Gowan had a relationship that seemed to be perpetually on the brink of collapse. Those closest to Sam would often describe Elene as unstable, a claim that painted her as the root of their problems. According to his family, Sam had made numerous attempts to break free from her grasp. Yet something about his actions after her disappearance raised more questions than answers. Although Sam's family painted a clear picture of Elene's faults, their narrative didn't explain why Sam was acting so erratically after she went missing. His behavior seemed more aligned with guilt, yet no one had any concrete evidence linking him to her disappearance. It wasn't long after Elene's vanishing that investigators began to turn their attention towards Sam. What initially seemed like a standard missing persons case quickly took a darker turn. Sam's strange behavior was undeniable. Interviews with his family revealed conflicting stories, some claiming he was trying to distance himself from Elene, while others described him as cold and detached after her disappearance. The inconsistencies in his responses were concerning, yet nothing about his actions at that time definitively pointed to foul play. Days after Elene's disappearance, Sam found himself in a psychiatric facility. Although he had been under scrutiny for his involvement in the case, there were no concrete leads to arrest him. With no physical evidence tying him to Elene's disappearance, the investigators reluctantly released Sam. It was a temporary reprieve, but it didn't last long. The very next day, Sam was seen at a local Walmart. He was buying alcohol, something that had become routine for him over the last few months. However, things would take a dangerous turn as the events of February 21st unfolded. As Sam prepared to leave the store, an off-duty officer recognized him and approached with questions regarding Elene's whereabouts. Nervous and clearly uncomfortable, Sam attempted to avoid the interaction. He asked if he could first move his truck before speaking with the officer, but it was clear he had other plans. As soon as Sam was in his vehicle, he slammed on the gas, narrowly avoiding the officer and speeding off into the streets of Rexburg. The officer quickly radioed for backup, and a high-speed chase ensued. Sam tore through the city, driving at reckless speeds of over 100 mph, swerving past pedestrians and cutting off traffic. Officers quickly realized that Sam had no intention of stopping, and his reckless behavior intensified the suspicion that he was hiding something. The chief officer overseeing the chase made the difficult decision to call it off for public safety reasons. The streets of Rexburg were no longer safe for pursuit, and Sam's escape only deepened the mystery surrounding Elene's disappearance. What happened next was almost as surprising as the chase itself. Despite his reckless evasion of the police, Sam returned to his apartment just hours later, acting as though nothing had happened. This return to normalcy led investigators to believe that Sam was hiding in plain sight, overestimating his ability to avoid detection. While law enforcement searched in other locations, Sam remained undisturbed. His overconfidence and failure to flee made it clear that he felt untouchable, but the weight of suspicion was beginning to catch up with him. Sam's actions in the days following his dangerous escape from the police showed just how reckless he had become. His freedom was short-lived, but in the meantime, his behavior only escalated. Despite the chase and his near collision with the officer, Sam appeared unbothered by the consequences of his actions. His arrogance made him believe that the authorities wouldn't catch him or find concrete evidence to charge him with anything. However, this overconfidence would soon be his downfall. The very next morning after his escape, Sam turned himself into the authorities. Faced with charges of evading law enforcement and reckless driving, Sam found himself in Pottawatomie County Jail, but his time there was brief. Within 24 hours, Emily, a close associate who had been following his every move, bailed him out. Despite being charged, Sam was free once again, which only added to the mystery of his involvement in Elene's disappearance. He had managed to evade the consequences of his reckless behavior, and to many, it seemed like he would continue to slip through the cracks. After his release, Sam's actions grew even more suspicious. He visited a local bank and made a curious deposit, $1,200. This was the exact amount that had been kept in Elene's safe the day she vanished. Why would Sam, a man who had no need for that amount of cash, deposit such a precise sum? The coincidence was too significant to ignore, and investigators immediately began to view this as another clue pointing to Sam's involvement in her disappearance. Sam's lack of concern for the connection between the money and Elene's safe only raised further suspicion. Not long after the deposit, Sam took another disturbing step. He drove his truck to a scrapyard where he requested that his vehicle be completely destroyed. For an entire hour, Sam watched as his truck was shredded into pieces. It was an unusual request for someone simply trying to get rid of a vehicle. Sam's intense focus on ensuring no evidence could be recovered from his truck only confirmed that he had something to hide. Destruction of a vehicle is often seen as an attempt to eliminate physical evidence, and it was hard for investigators not to see this act as a deliberate attempt to erase any trace of his involvement in Elene's disappearance. The authorities were aware of another person who had been mentioned in the initial investigation, Mike Brockman. However, after further investigation, Mike was quickly eliminated from suspicion. He had been at work in Omaha, Nebraska, on the day Elene disappeared, leaving only one person left as the prime suspect. Sam Brammer's actions were becoming increasingly difficult to explain away. The circumstantial evidence stacked against him was mounting, but detectives still lacked a concrete piece of evidence to arrest him for Elene's murder. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Sam's pattern of evasiveness, combined with his reckless and erratic behavior, painted a picture of a man desperate to cover his tracks. As law enforcement prepared for the next phase of the investigation, they were aware that Sam's time was running out. With every action, Sam was inching closer to being caught. It was only a matter of time before the truth about what had happened to Elene would be revealed. February 26th marked a significant shift in the case when a group of individuals in Iowa, near a public shooting area, stumbled upon a horrifying sight. The group had been driving when they noticed a body beneath a bridge. Initially, they thought it could have been a discarded mannequin or a piece of debris, but as they got closer, they realized it was the lifeless body of a woman. The group immediately called 911, and within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the scene. When officers examined the body, they were initially unable to determine its identity due to the condition of the remains. The body was severely decomposed, but there was one crucial detail that caught their attention. The clothing matched the exact outfit Elene Gowan had been wearing the day she disappeared. The confirmation was chilling. Elene had been missing for days, but now there was undeniable proof that something tragic had occurred. The body, although unrecognizable, was confirmed to be Elene's, and her death would serve as a turning point in the investigation. Elene's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. The forensic examination revealed a disturbing series of injuries, 8 blunt force trauma injuries to the head. There was also a fractured front tooth, suggesting that Elene had been struck multiple times. However, none of these injuries appeared to be directly fatal. While they were certainly serious, the coroner was unable to determine a clear cause of death. Her cause of death was officially ruled as undetermined, creating a significant problem for investigators. Without a direct cause of death, it would be difficult to immediately charge anyone with murder. For detectives, this was both a breakthrough and a frustration. On one hand, the body had been found, linking Elene's fate to her disappearance, but on the other hand, the absence of a definitive cause of death meant they could not move forward with the murder charge. However, they couldn't ignore the circumstantial evidence that seemed to pile up against Sam Brammer. He had been the last known person to be involved with Elene, and his increasingly bizarre behavior only added fuel to the fire. Despite the frustration, law enforcement pushed forward with their investigation. The focus turned to finding concrete evidence to link Sam directly to Elene's death. Sam had already been arrested for abuse of a corpse. After it was discovered he had attempted to destroy any physical evidence that could connect him to the crime. His behavior seemed to be growing more erratic with each passing day, and the police believed that his actions spoke volumes about his guilt. Sam's refusal to cooperate in his ongoing evasions left little doubt in the minds of the detectives they were closing in on him. While the investigation continued, the authorities couldn't shake the haunting thought that they were on the cusp of uncovering the full truth about what had happened to Elene, but they still needed one crucial piece of evidence to put everything together. The discovery of her body was just the beginning, and they knew that the answers to the questions surrounding her death were buried somewhere within the details of Sam's actions. After the discovery of Elene's body, detectives knew that they needed a breakthrough. It wasn't enough to have circumstantial evidence, they needed something definitive that would secure a conviction. With the cause of death still undetermined, the authorities turned their attention back to the forensic pathologist working on Elene's remains. Days passed, and it seemed as if the case was at a standstill. However, forensic experts were still meticulously examining every detail of Elene's body in search of something that might have been overlooked. It wasn't until weeks after the autopsy that forensic pathologists made a key discovery that would prove to be pivotal in the case. As they re-examined the remains, they noticed something chilling. There were distinct zipper marks on Elene's neck. This was a breakthrough. The marks suggested that Elene had been strangled, and based on the size and positioning of the marks, it was highly likely that Sam Brammer had been the one to strangle her. This discovery was a game-changer. It was the concrete evidence that detectives had been waiting for. Zipper marks on the neck were a clear indication that someone had used force to restrict Elene's breathing, and the evidence pointed directly to Sam. It was impossible to ignore the fact that Sam had been the last person seen with Elene before her disappearance, and now this new evidence confirmed that he had played a role in her death. The case was beginning to take shape, and detectives wasted no time in securing a warrant for his arrest on charges of second-degree murder. Meanwhile, Sam's behavior continued to be erratic. After the discovery of Elene's body and despite the growing evidence against him, he showed little remorse or concern. In fact, he appeared to be unfazed by the situation. His overconfidence in believing that he could escape justice only deepened the suspicions of law enforcement. They were certain that Sam's attempts to erase evidence, such as destroying his truck and making suspicious deposits of money, were all part of an elaborate attempt to cover his tracks. But now, with the forensic revelation of strangulation, they had the final piece of the puzzle. On the day Sam was arrested, officers were prepared. They arrived at his apartment, and this time they had no intention of letting him slip away. When they knocked on the door, a woman answered and confirmed that Sam was inside. The police entered the apartment and found Sam asleep, seemingly unaware of the impending arrest. He was taken into custody without incident, but the truth of what he had done to Elene was finally catching up to him. The case was rapidly moving toward a final resolution, and Sam's reign of evasion and reckless behavior was nearing its end. The forensic revelation of strangulation was the tipping point. With the new evidence linking Sam to Elene's death, prosecutors now had the ammunition they needed to take the case to trial. As the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Sam's actions, his attempts to evade the law, destroy evidence, and cover his tracks were the hallmarks of a man desperate to hide his involvement in a brutal crime. The truth about what happened to Elene Gowan was now in the hands of the legal system, and Sam Brammer would soon have to face the consequences of his actions. Considerable momentum. With the chilling discovery of Elene Gowan's body, the forensic revelation of strangulation, and a pattern of increasingly suspicious behavior from Sam, investigators were confident that they had enough evidence to move forward with prosecution. The legal process would now hinge on the details of his actions, his motives, and the overwhelming circumstantial evidence that painted him as the prime suspect. The trial that would unfold in the months to come would be a battle of emotions, science, and strategy, with Sam's fate hanging in the balance. The trial began in earnest in the summer of 2023. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence: Sam's reckless behavior, his attempts to cover his tracks by destroying his truck, and the discovery of the $1,200 deposit that matched the amount missing from Elene's safe. But the most damning piece of evidence was the forensic analysis showing that Elene had been strangled, likely by Sam himself. This revelation sealed the case for the prosecution and sent a clear message to the jury. Sam Brammer was guilty of more than just Elene's disappearance. He had taken her life in a brutal, calculated act. Throughout the trial, the defense attempted to paint a different picture of Sam, one that portrayed him as a man overwhelmed by a chaotic relationship with Elene, but not one capable of murder. They argued that Sam's erratic behavior was a result of emotional trauma and instability rather than guilt over committing a crime. They suggested that Sam's actions, including his flight from the police, were the result of fear and panic, not the calculated moves of a murderer. But the defense's arguments failed to sway the jury. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. As the trial continued, more details of Sam and Elene's relationship were revealed. Their troubled past was explored in depth, shedding light on the volatility and toxicity that had characterized their time together. Witnesses testified about the tension between the couple, recounting instances of fights, emotional abuse, and even threats of violence. Some suggested that Sam had felt trapped, his life dominated by Elene's instability and demands. These testimonies painted a portrait of a man who had grown desperate for an escape. But while these revelations added context to Sam's mental state, they did little to exonerate him. If anything, they painted him as someone with a motive to silence Elene for good. The trial also brought forth the disturbing facts surrounding Elene's death. The prosecution detailed the extent of her injuries, the blunt force trauma to her head, and the evidence of strangulation. They argued that Sam had not just killed Elene in a fit of rage, but had carefully orchestrated her murder. His actions following the crime, destroying his truck, depositing the money, and evading police were all part of a desperate attempt to erase the evidence and avoid detection. The evidence suggested that Sam had thought he could outsmart the law, but in the end, his hubris had led to his downfall. As the defense rested their case, the prosecution presented its closing arguments. They emphasized that Sam's actions were not those of a man in distress, but of a calculated killer trying to cover his tracks. They reminded the jury of the key pieces of evidence, the strangulation marks, the destroyed truck, and the suspicious deposit, and made a compelling argument that all signs pointed to Sam as Elene's murderer. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the evidence and the arguments presented by both sides. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as they debated the facts. Ultimately, on November 17, 2023, the jury reached their verdict. Ivan Samuel Brammer was found guilty of second-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and theft. The conviction was a bittersweet victory for the prosecution and for Elene's family, who had spent months searching for answers and justice. Sam's sentencing followed shortly after the conviction. The judge addressed the severity of the crime, noting that while Sam had not been charged with first-degree murder, his actions were no less reprehensible. The brutality of Elene's death, combined with Sam's calculated efforts to cover up the crime, left little room for leniency. Sam was sentenced to 65 years in prison, a lengthy sentence that ensured he would never again walk free. For Elene's family, the conviction was both a relief and a reminder of the pain they had endured. Justice had been served, but it would never bring Elene back. Her life had been cut short by someone she had loved, someone who had seemed to be the key figure in her troubled life. The trial had revealed the depth of Sam's deceit, his manipulations, and his willingness to go to extreme lengths to protect himself at the expense of another life. In the end, the justice system had held him accountable, but the scars left by Elene's death would never truly heal. For Sam, the sentence was a bitter conclusion to a life that had spiraled out of control. His actions had not only destroyed Elene's life, but had also sealed his own fate. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars, facing the consequences of a crime that had shaken a community and left a trail of devastation in its wake.